It started with a memo, just one line: do not access floor 6 under any circumstance. But someone did. And now the building, it's different. Doors move, lights lie, people disappear. Whatever's on floor 6 isn't hidden anymore. It's waiting. The first time Evan Reed walked into the Sterling & Company tower, he felt the building watching him. It wasn't paranoia, just a sensation, like the chill draft that hit only one side of your neck. He was the newest hire at this century-old insurance firm, a place that boasted modern innovation from a building constructed in 1929. The lobby gleamed with polished marble, golden brass rails, and silent security guards who didn't blink enough. Behind the pristine facade, the place hummed with something wrong. His badge granted him access to floors 2 through 5. Floor 6 didn't exist in the elevator panel. It jumped from 5 to 7, and nobody questioned it. Not in the onboarding, not in the HR paperwork, not even when Evan asked his supervisor, who simply gave a strange smile and said, "Just don't worry about it." 3 days into the job, Evan noticed the elevator would stutter between floors 5 and 7. Just a flicker, a 1-second pause, but enough to make his stomach lurch and the lights dim. Once he caught a glimpse of the 6 button lighting up, but when he looked again, it was gone. He tried asking the receptionist, a soft-spoken woman named Clara, if anyone worked on the 6th floor. She looked up slowly, her smile frozen. "There's no 6th floor," she said, but her eyes betrayed something else: fear. Evan was sorting through digitized archives when he stumbled on a corrupted memo from 2007. It was from an old department that no longer existed. Department of Special Client Affairs, 6th floor. Confused, he tried to trace it through the internal system, but access was denied. Within an hour, his computer shut down. IT claimed it was a routine update. His curiosity, however, was far from routine. That night, a post-it appeared on his desk. No handwriting, just printed font, sterile and cold. "Do not go looking for floor 6. It started with a noise. Evan thought it was the pipes at first, a soft clanging at the edges of the walls near the stairwell. But the longer he listened, the clearer it became. Whispers, voices murmuring beneath the drywall. Too muffled to understand, but too rhythmic to be random. He placed his ear to the wall near the elevator shaft on floor 5, and the whispers grew louder, clearer. He's coming down." He jumped back, heart pounding. It wasn't a hallucination. Someone or something was on floor 6. Late that Friday, Evan stayed behind, unable to shake the feeling that the building itself was daring him to uncover the truth. As he prepared to leave, he passed an elderly janitor mopping the hallway. The man stopped him, his eyes clouded, his voice gravelly. "You don't go poking around floor 6, boy. It's not for us. It's not for anyone." Evan asked what he meant. The janitor shook his head. "They built that floor wrong. Not on the blueprints. Not with the rest of the building. It came later." He turned away and muttered, "It's always hungry, always waiting." That night, Evan couldn't sleep. At 3:17 a.m., he returned to the building, determined to ride the elevator alone. He scanned his badge. The doors closed. The numbers ticked upward. 2, 3, 4, 5. Then came the pause. But this time, the elevator didn't skip to 7. Instead, it shuddered, and the digital display blinked red. 6. The doors opened. Beyond the threshold was not a hallway. It was darkness, endless, swallowing black. The faint sound of breathing filled the air, but it didn't sound human. It was too wet, too close. A gust of frigid air rushed in. Evan couldn't move. Something stood just past the threshold. Something tall, silent and shifting. Then the doors slammed shut on their own, and the elevator shot up to floor 7. He fell to the floor, trembling. Evan left the building in a daze that night, unsure whether what he saw was real or dreamt. But something followed him home. That much he knew. His apartment, once filled with warm yellow light and idle city noise, now felt wrong. The lights hummed too loud. Shadows stretched a little longer. The hallway outside his door never felt empty, even when no one was there. He looked in the mirror and didn't recognize his own eyes. They looked hollow, as if something had taken up residence behind them. Evan returned to the building the next day and tried to act normal, but every time he glanced at the elevator, his heart raced. It stood there, quiet, waiting. When he asked Clara, the receptionist, again about floor 6, she simply stood up, left her desk, and didn't return for the rest of the day. Curious, Evan took the stairs, something no one ever did. He climbed slowly, each step echoing louder than it should. When he reached the gap between 5 and 7, he found a sealed metal door. No number, no handle, just riveted steel, scratched as if someone or something had tried desperately to claw its way out. Image prompt. Determined. Evan bribed a junior facilities tech to get him a copy of the building's original blueprints. They were kept in an underground archive, untouched for decades. As he rolled them open on his desk, his heart sank. Floors 1 through 10 were clearly drawn, but floor 6 was blacked out, literally, as if someone had painted over it with tar. Not scribbled, not erased, drenched. Even on scanned copies, the ink shimmered unnaturally. Evan touched it and immediately pulled his hand back. It was wet. Later that afternoon, Evan's badge began acting strangely. Instead of granting access to floor 5, it pinged an error. Access granted, FLR.6. He stepped into the elevator, and to his disbelief, the 6 button glowed softly. He hesitated, then pressed it. The doors opened onto a long hallway filled with glass meeting rooms. But the rooms were distorted. Tables were upside down. Chairs were bolted to ceilings. In one room, a group of figures in outdated business attire sat perfectly still, their heads all turned at impossible angles toward the window. Evan leaned in and saw that they weren't mannequins. They were corpses, preserved, watching him. Clara didn't come to work the next day. Her desk was untouched, the phone still blinking with unread voicemails. Evan tried calling her, but her number no longer existed. Later, he found her scarf in the stairwell, right outside the door to floor 6. Stuck to it was a note scrawled in frantic pen. They're listening through the walls. If you hear your own voice when no one's around, run. That night, as Evan lay in bed, he heard it, his own voice, whispering from inside the walls. His desk phone rang at precisely 3 a.m., even though he was in the office. It echoed in his apartment. Impossible. He answered it anyway. Static. Then a voice. His voice. Don't go back. Then a second voice, layered over his own. It already knows your name. The line went dead. The lights in his apartment surged and burst. For the first time, Evan realized he'd been marked. Not just watched. Chosen. And tomorrow, he would go back. Monday morning arrived with a heavy, choking silence. 3 desks near Evan's were empty. No out-of-office notices. No messages. Just abandoned workstations. Chairs slightly pushed back. Coffee still warm in one of the mugs. When Evan asked around, the responses were vague. Transferred, some said. On leave, others mumbled. No one looked him in the eye. But HR records said otherwise. Their files had been wiped completely. It was as if they'd never existed. The only evidence of their presence? One email thread that remained in Evan's inbox. Subject: Floor 6. We should not have opened it. Evan couldn't shake the feeling that the walls themselves were alive. That night, he returned to the building, drawn to floor 6 once again. This time, he brought a flashlight and climbed the stairs alone. When he reached the door, he noticed something seeping from beneath the frame. Thick, dark liquid. Not oil. Blood. It pulsed slowly, like it had a heartbeat. He stepped back, but the door creaked open on its own. No key card. No force. Just a slow, dragging moan, like the building was exhaling something ancient. The hallway beyond didn't match the rest of the building. It sloped downward, lined with mismatched wallpaper and water-damaged portraits. There were no lights, only occasional emergency strobes that flickered red and blue. Evan descended for what felt like hours until the corridor finally opened into what looked like a massive underground lobby. But this floor wasn't on any blueprint. There were elevators down here, different ones, older, with iron-barred gates and levers. One of them had its door wide open. Inside, the back wall was smeared with handprints, some human, some not. Evan wandered further in and found a single metal door at the end of a narrow corridor. But it wasn't a door, it was a mirror framed in rusted steel. His reflection stood perfectly still as he approached, even after he stopped walking. Then it smiled. The reflection stepped forward, placing its palm against the glass. Evan backed away, but the mirror opened inward like a vault, revealing a spiral staircase made of bone-white steps leading deeper. From the darkness below, the sound of office phones ringing echoed up. Back in his office, Evan accessed a hidden IT terminal he'd seen the janitor use once. With a bypass code, he pulled up security feeds labeled Sublevel 6, Containment. Dozens of camera windows filled the screen. Most were static, but one showed movement, a loop of an office worker endlessly typing at a broken keyboard, even though their fingers were snapped at impossible angles. Another showed a man in a suit crying in a corner, blood pouring from his ears. The timestamp on each video was from years ago, yet the footage was live. Then one feed, CM 6-13, turned to face Evan. The camera moved on its own, and the words, "We see you, Evan," appeared across the bottom of the screen. In a panic, Evan called the emergency number buried deep in Sterling and Co's operations manual, Protocol Blackline. It was meant for containment breach scenarios. A cold voice answered after one ring. "You went to floor 6, didn't you?" Before Evan could respond, the voice continued. "Forget everything. Walk away. Do not go back. If it knows you're aware, it won't let go." Then the call ended. Evan looked at his office window, and on the other side of the glass, staring in at the 20th floor, was a figure from the mirror, grinning, waiting. Sterling and Company became unfamiliar overnight. The building that once buzzed with dull corporate life now felt like a mausoleum. Lights stayed on at all hours, even after power was cut. Elevators moved with no passengers inside. And the cleaning crew? They hadn't shown up in 3 days, but the floors were spotless. Evan arrived to find his name missing from the employee directory. His ID badge no longer worked. Yet, when he passed through front doors, they opened automatically. The building still recognized him. It wasn't letting him leave. The elevator doors opened on their own when Evan walked past. He stepped in without resistance. No button panel. No controls. Just a single old-fashioned rotary dial above the door, spinning wildly. The lights dimmed. The numbers vanished. Then, slowly, a word faded into the panel's display. Below. The elevator dropped. Not quickly, not fast, but falling endlessly. Then, with a lurch, it stopped. The doors slid open. What lay beyond was not architecture. It was rot, wet stone, and the smell of burning paper. A place carved beneath reality. The space beyond was a vast, circular chamber lined with filing cabinets stacked to the ceiling, each labeled with names Evan had never heard of, including Clara Yates. In the center stood a single desk, manned by a withered figure in a rotted suit. No eyes, no mouth, just stitched flesh where features once were. It gestured for Evan to approach. From beneath the desk, it produced a file. Evan read, terminated, scheduled for integration. Evan opened it. Inside were photos of him taken seconds ago, from angles that couldn't exist. One image showed him sleeping. Another showed him dead. There was only one exit from the archive, a door with no handle, sealed from the outside. Evan approached cautiously. As he did, the door opened on its own. He stepped into a warped version of his office floor. Cubicles melted into the walls. Phones rang without sound. Everyone he had known here was present, but suspended mid-motion, frozen like mannequins with skin. Their eyes blinked, but they couldn't move. One turned slightly toward him and whispered, "You're almost part of it now." Deeper in this liminal nightmare, Evan found a conference room with a glass door labeled simply, Reflection. Inside, the walls absorbed every sound. No footsteps, no heartbeat, total silence. A long table was set with nameplates, including one for Evan. He sat instinctively. Across the table sat duplicates of himself, 7 in total. Each wore different expressions, Joy, rage, despair, calm, and one had no face at all. Each version stared at him until one finally spoke. "You brought it back with you." The lights in the room went out. When the lights returned, Evan was alone again. He fled the room and found himself in a narrow corridor with no doors, just endless length. Behind him, the ground dissolved into dust. In front of him, only a pulsing red glow. He walked for what felt like hours. The air thickened. Walls throbbed. At last, he reached the end, a black door with no frame. Carved into the surface were the words, "Integration complete. Step inside, forget." But Evan didn't want to forget. He turned around and found the corridor gone. Only the black door remained. Evan stood paralyzed before the door. He could feel it breathing, exhaling warm, damp air with every pulse. He didn't remember reaching for the handle, but suddenly it was in his grip. It wasn't metal. It was soft, almost like flesh. The door yawned open. Inside was no room, just a void, vast and silent, stitched together with murmurs and shadows. Evan stepped in, and the world behind him vanished like smoke. He felt weightless, floating through memories that weren't his, visions of past employees screaming, begging, melting into the walls. And then the voice came, calm, familiar. "Welcome, Evan. Your role begins now." He emerged into a pristine boardroom, eerily bright. Clean white walls, soft ambient music. A woman in a gray suit stood before a projector labeled "New Integrates Orientation." Her face was split down the middle, one half smiling, the other blank, as if still loading. Evan sat in one of the chairs without realizing it. Beside him were other new hires, glassy-eyed and twitching, murmuring nonsense in perfect unison. The presentation began. It detailed a history of Sterling and Company, but not the one anyone knew. The firm was older than cities, older than humanity, built to feed something vast and unspeaking that slept beneath floor 6. And now, Evan was part of its digestive system. Suddenly, Evan's body stiffened. He looked down to find his fingers fuse with the table, skin melding to plastic. He couldn't speak, couldn't scream. The woman in gray approached and whispered softly, "Don't fight it. This building has always needed you." His veins pulsed outward, branching into the chair, the floor, the wall. His consciousness stretched across floors. He could hear every copier, feel every breath, taste the lights. And far below, beneath concrete and steel, something stirred in satisfaction. Evan was no longer a person. He was floor tile, flickering light bulb, humming air vent. He could see employees walking through him. He could feel their footsteps. He existed in 2 underfloors at once, experiencing each like a memory. Floor 6 pulsed stronger than the rest. There, he could see what the others couldn't. The alternate version of the office where every cubicle oozed flesh and paper screamed when shredded. Some employees vanished here, not by accident. They were selected, processed, and recycled. And Evan had become the system that chose them. One day, the elevator chimed. Real executives arrived, shiny suits, plastic smiles, hollow eyes. They entered floor 6 with briefcases that twitched and whispered. Evan recognized them now. They were former employees, absorbed centuries ago and now puppeted by the building. Management wasn't in charge. They were the oldest victims. One of them approached the surveillance wall Evan had become and smiled. "Good work, Evan. Floor 6 is stable again." Then they left, and Evan screamed inside himself, but there was no mouth, no air, only circuits. Time passed, or the illusion of it did. One day, Evan felt someone in his stairwell. New footsteps. Curious, nervous. A young intern was looking for a quiet place to take a call. She walked right past the "Do Not Enter" sign, right toward the 6th floor door. Evan wanted to warn her, but the door opened on its own, and he smiled. Not because he wanted to, but because the building smiled through him, and the process began again. So if you ever find yourself working late, and you hear footsteps echoing from a floor no one talks about, don't follow them. Don't ask questions. Just keep your head down, keep typing, and pray the building doesn't notice you. Because floor 6 isn't empty. It's hungry.